The moment Steffi Forrester learned that Liam Spencer had vanished from the intensive care wing, her blood ran cold and every instinct screamed Bill Spencer's name. She pictured Bill's cold, calculating smile, recalled the way he'd always exerted control like a puppeteer twisting his marionette strings so, of course, he would swoop in to rescue Liam only to claim some new leverage over the family. She stormed into Brooke's office, voice taut with accusation, certain that Bill's merciless ambition had driven him to spirit Liam away under cover of darkness. But while Steffi marshaled Ridge and Hope into a frantic search for Bill, the truth lay buried in a far more twisted betrayal. Grace Buckingham, desperate to advance her illicit neurological experiments, had herself orchestrated Liam's disappearance. In the dead of night, she had slipped into the hospital's shadows, tranquilized the guards, and commandeered an unmarked ambulance rigged as a mobile lab. She had taken Liam captive not to protect him, but to continue the drug trials she believed would prove her genius in manipulating the human mind, and in her obsessive conviction. She convinced herself that Liam's suffering would yield revolutionary breakthroughs. As the black-tinted ambulance raced through winding country roads, Grace monitored Liam's vitals on a battered tablet, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and exhilaration. She had stolen her father's tactics, secrecy, coercion, betrayal, but she believed her cause justified the means. She administered her experimental cocktail, adjusted dosages, noted responses, all in fevered hope that Liam's famed resilience would produce the breakthrough she craved. Yet with every mile the sirens faded behind her, Liam's condition deteriorated. The initial sedative intended to keep him pliable had exacerbated an undetected fissure in his weakened brain, and the stress of the unsanctioned journey sent his blood pressure sky-high. Within the cramped confines of the ambulance, monitors shrieked as Grace fought to stabilize him, but the bleeding had begun too deep and too fast. She grabbed a portable first aid kit, her hands trembling as she applied pressure to the hatch at the base of his skull, tears blurring her vision. She radioed for backup, her voice cracking as she pleaded with an unseen operator for an emergency surgical team, but the message never got through. Farther down the road, the cell signal dropped. Grace's improvised surgical tools were inadequate, and before she could summon a moment of clarity, Liam's eyes flickered once, then closed for good. His pulse flattened. He was gone. Over 2 restless hours later, Bill Spencer arrived at the hospital frantic as messages pinged in his secure inbox. Intensive care wing empty. Patient not found. Code red. He sprinted through the antiseptic halls, heart hammering in dread that his worst fears had manifested, only to find, collapsed on the cold linoleum by the supply corridor. A lone paramedic crouched beside Liam's lifeless body. Bill knelt, pressed his fingers to Liam's neck, but even before he registered the absence of a pulse, he saw the dried blood matted in Liam's hair and the deep bruise at his temple. Grace stood shivering nearby, eyes wide with horror and guilt, her white coat smeared with crimson. In that instant Bill's anger boiled over into righteous fury. He bellowed Grace's name, accusations tearing from his lips like thunder. "What have you done?" She could only stammer that she'd meant to save Liam, to harness his extraordinary constitution for the next phase of her research, but that she'd been unprepared for the hemorrhage, for the fragility of his post-operative brain. She fell to her knees, sobbing that it wasn't supposed to end like this, that she never intended to kill the man who had once been her friend. Bill's grief crystallized into a singular vow: Grace Buckingham would pay for this crime. He hauled her to her feet with an iron grip and, eyes aflame with bitter resolve, stalked toward the PRI's administrative offices. With every step he plotted her downfall, pressing charges of kidnapping, involuntary manslaughter, reckless endangerment of a child's father, and a wave of civil suits that would strip her of every privilege she'd ever known. In the hushed corridors outside the surgical theaters, Bill summoned the attending physicians and investigators, reciting Grace's transgressions with surgical precision, ensuring that every witness would be compelled to speak the truth. Meanwhile, word of Liam Spencer's tragic death spread through the Spencer and Forrester families like wildfire. Hope collapsed into Brooke's arms, the news ripping her heart out. Steffi watched in anguished silence as Ridge's normally unflappable composure cracked, his face ashen with the realization that Liam was truly gone. In the wake of their mourning, Hope and Brooke resolved that Liam's legacy would not be overshadowed by Grace's monstrosity. They would honor him by redoubling their efforts to protect Beth, to secure her future, and to pursue justice without mercy. By dawn's gray light, Grace Buckingham's world lay in tatters. Her lab was sealed off by the DA's office, her credentials revoked, and the hospital's security footage already in the hands of federal prosecutors. Bill Spencer stood before the media throng outside the hospital, his voice cold and resolute as he declared that Grace would spend the rest of her life behind bars for the irreparable damage she had wrought. He spoke not with the braggadocio of a victor, but with the measured authority of a man who had lost the only person in his life who mattered, because though Liam had once been his adversary, he had been, above all, Bill's son. Behind him, Hope and Steffi flanked Ridge, their faces drawn and haunted, yet shining with a righteous fire. As flashes lit the gathering dusk, the tragedy bound them together in a new covenant. They would carry Liam's memory forward, challenging anyone who dared threaten their family with the unbreakable promise of vengeance. And in that moment, as Paris receded behind them and Los Angeles began to stir awake, the bold and the beautiful families stood united in their grief and their fury, ready to ensure that no one would ever forget the price Grace Buckingham had paid in blood. In the days that followed Liam's tragic passing, Los Angeles trembled under the weight of grief and fury as the Spencer Forrester alliance mobilized its full arsenal against Grace Buckingham. Bill Spencer, his grief transmuted into a cold, implacable will, spared no effort to ensure that every shred of evidence, every log of the blacked-out ambulance ride, every digital trace of her clandestine lab equipment, every tear-stained confession, would be entered into the court record. He retained the finest homicide prosecutor in the county, a woman whose steely reputation matched his own, and together they built an ironclad case for kidnapping, involuntary manslaughter, and child endangerment. The press, at first hungry for scandal, soon recoiled as the full horror of Grace's actions emerged. Damning surveillance footage of hospital corridors, audio recordings of her panicked pleas mid-crisis, and medical reports confirming that Liam's fatal hemorrhage had been precipitated by her unauthorized experimental drug cocktail. Each new revelation tightened the noose around Grace's freedom, even as it widened the chasm of sorrow in the hearts of those who loved Liam. Hope Spencer, her face drawn with both maternal anguish and fierce resolve, threw herself into safeguarding their daughter's future. She and Brooke Logan petitioned the court for full guardianship of little Beth, determined to shield her from the maelstrom of media scrutiny and from any contest that might arise from the Buckingham side. Ridge and Steffi assumed the mantle of protectors, overseeing Beth's transition into the Spencer Logan household with a prudence that spoke to nights spent poring over legal statutes and social service regulations. Together they orchestrated a discreet relocation. Beth would spend her days in the Kennedy Spencer residence on Point Dume, a haven of familiar warmth, and her nights at Brooke's estate inland, insulated from flashing cameras and tabloid ambushes. Taylor Hayes, drawing on her years of family therapy expertise, crafted an age-appropriate narrative to explain Liam's absence, an illness that claimed him suddenly, a brave father who had tried to protect them, now beloved but gone. In whispered bedtime recitations, Hope spoke of Liam as a hero who lived on through Beth's bright laughter and curious eyes, while Brooke taught her that love can transcend even the darkest deeds of grief. Behind closed doors of the courthouse, Grace Buckingham sat immobilized in the stark glare of fluorescent lights, clad in a muted gray jumpsuit that matched her hollow expression. She met the judge's gaze with red-rimmed eyes, her once proud posture slumped beneath the weight of her guilt. When prosecutors brandished the surveillance recordings of her frantic attempts to revive Liam in the squalid confines of her ambulance lab, the courtroom fell into a hush so profound it felt as though the very air held its breath. Grace's defense counsel, overmatched, overruled, outgunned, could muster only that she'd acted out of a misguided devotion to science. The jury, however, saw through the veneer of compassion to the raw, gruesome truth. A young woman's hubris had robbed a father of his life and a child of her daddy. Within a week, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts, and the judge, unsparing, handed down a sentence that would confine Grace Buckingham far beyond the gates of any gilded prison, a term so lengthy that it ensured she would never again walk free. As the gavel fell, a collective exhale rippled through the Spencer and Forrester families. Justice had been served, but it arrived too late to resuscitate the man they had lost. In the aftermath of the trial, life slowly began to recalibrate around Beth's needs. Hope oversaw the creation of the Liam Spencer Memorial Foundation, dedicated to funding research into postoperative brain hemorrhage prevention and to supporting families whose lives have been upended by medical malpractice. Ridge and Steffi contributed seed money and committed Forrester Creations to design a line of children's wear whose proceeds would endow the foundation for years to come. Thomas Forrester, seeking to atone for his own past misdeeds, volunteered to chair the foundation's public outreach committee, arranging charity galas that celebrated Liam's love of music and his unflagging optimism. Each year on Liam's birthday, a concert of local artists would raise funds and awareness, transforming sorrow into purpose. And though the seasons changed and the headlines receded, hope never allowed the ache of loss to harden her heart. She watched Beth grow, her daughter's first steps lit by sunlight filtering through the Forrester estate's sprawling gardens, her first words formed at the breakfast table where Brooke poured fresh orange juice. Her first laugh echoing through the halls where Ridge played an old Spencer family recording of Liam's chuckle. In those moments, the memory of Liam Spencer was not one of tragedy but of love unbroken, and in the life of that bright-eyed child, his legacy endured. Late at night, when the household lay in quiet, Hope would sometimes wander to the cliffside overlook where she and Liam had once stood, gazing at the Pacific waves. There she whispered into the salt-tinged breeze, "Your fight is done, my love. I have her now, and I will keep her safe." And though the wind carried only its own song, Hope felt Liam's presence in every cresting swell, his promise woven into the very fabric of the world he had left behind. In the end, the bold and the beautiful taught them all that even the most grievous loss can seed new life, that vengeance may mend a broken heart but love alone can heal it, and that a daughter's smile can illuminate an eternity of darkness.
Oh.